Good day or good evening, however that pertains to you. Welcome to the next episode of Creation, Genesis, and Origins. I'm Dick Fisher along with my co-host Ken Miller. In the previous episodes, we began to examine the historical beginnings of the Genesis story in southern Mesopotamia, present-day Iraq, and we looked at where the Sumerians and Akkadians lived from perhaps as early as 7,000 years ago until Sumer was destroyed about 4,000 years ago, roughly the time of Abraham.
Excavations began in southern Mesopotamia in the late 1800s. Cuneiform writing on clay tablets contained epic tales, liturgical texts, decrees of the kings, and other assorted literature that pertained to the lives of these peoples.
In 1872, in the basement of the British Museum, George Smith began the process of translating the texts and discovered the flood description recorded in Genesis had been preempted by texts set down at an earlier date, describing the same event in quite similar terms.
In future episodes, we will examine evidence for the biblical flood. Today, we will look at kings lists found in some of the earliest cities and see what relevance they may have compared to the 10 generations recorded in Genesis from Adam to Noah.
Mesopotamian cities were excavated at different times and by various teams of archaeologists from interested countries such as the United States, England, Germany, and France. Once it was discovered that evidence for the stories in Genesis might be found in these ancient texts. The Sumerian king lists are among the curiosities that have never been fully explored or explained.
These king lists were found in some of the oldest cities and contain a list of kings who reigned over the entire region before the flood, and continue with lists of kings who reigned over some of the cities that we restored after the flood, as well as some cities that sprang up later. So far, at least 17 copies have been found that contain a list of pre-flood kings, all recorded in the Sumerian language.
Since Sumerian was the official written language in Mesopotamia until Sargon, a Semite, came to power in 2371 BC, it should not be surprising that the list of kings, especially related to the pre-flood era, is recorded in Sumerian. This does not mean, however, that those kings necessarily were of Sumerian descent. Some of the kings listed appear to have been Akkadian or Chaldean, but were recorded by their Sumerian equivalents. Of the 10 kings recorded, the first 2 who ruled at Eridu and the last 4 who reigned at Sippar and at Shuruppak, respectively, do appear to be non-Sumerian. There is some evidence, for example, that the famous post-flood king of Uruk, Gilgamesh, who ruled around 2700 BC, may have been of Semitic descent, not Sumerian at all.
When the Sumerian king list began to surface, there was a rush to show these were the source of biblical patriarchs. The Berosus list, close companion to the Sumerian versions, was analyzed by the Assyriologist Zimmern, who concluded, "It can hardly be doubted that the biblical tradition of Genesis 5 concerning the antediluvian patriarchs is basically identical to the Babylonian tradition about 10 antediluvian primeval kings."
Just for clarity, antediluvian means pre-flood. Taking the opposite tack, G.F. Hazel made a comparative study and found a complete lack of agreement and relationship between Genesis 5 and the Sumerian kings. As is often the case, the truth may be found between extremes. The Genesis 5 patriarchs and the kings listed cannot possibly be basically identical, for reasons we shall see. On the other hand, to say there is a complete lack of agreement without considering historical evidence that shows some commonality is also quite mistaken.
King lists were discovered in excavated cities, and although there is general agreement between them all, there are differences that can be attributed to geographical peculiarities, individual scribal mistakes, difficulties in communication between ancient cities, and the sheer antiquity of the material. Earlier texts may differ from later texts as fresh scribes make subtle revisions. Also, clay tablets are sometimes broken with some of the text missing. Here is one king list, Weld Blundell 444.
The king lists are in narrative form, and all primary lists begin, when the kingship was lowered from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu. In Eridu, Alulim became king and ruled 28,800 years.
Here is Eridu on the map, and it is the oldest city in Mesopotamia, dated by archaeologists at 4800 BC.
As to the startling number of years, keep in mind, the Sumerians used a sexagesimal numbering system, and although the terms of reign for both pre-flood and post-flood kings are in the thousands of years, the numbers are easily divided by 60 and 60 squared. And we don't know if calendar years are intended or moon phases or what. So rather than get bogged down in the years listed, what is more germane is the cities where they reigned, and all fit within a time frame that is between 4800 and 3000 BC. So the cities where each king was said to reign does make logical sense. Here the king list will be presented in table form so that we may use only one list for comparison purposes. King list WB 62, found in excavations at Larsa, is revised, taking into account another primary list, WB 444, plus 5 other lists that are not included here. A composite list shows the kings listed in order and the cities where they reigned. We'll take these one by one. Of note is that the first king listed does not appear to be a Sumerian, as the name is a Semitic or Akkadian name. This correlates with the pottery found at Eridu at the lowest level. Although Sumerian pottery can be found at higher levels, at the lowest level found on virgin soil, no Sumerian pottery is present. Likewise, the second name is also non-Sumerian. An error of order appears on WB 62 and is corrected on the composite list. At this point, the Sumerian king list records the first historical act of aggression. Eridu is smitten with weapons, to quote the king list, and kingship passes to Bad Tabera, where the first genuine Sumerians are named. Here is the Sumerian city of Bad Tabera on the map. So the first war of aggression in recorded history is here between the Sumerians at Bad Tabera and the Akkadians living in Eridu. In future discussions, we will see just how important the city of Eridu is to our understanding of historical events.
The fourth king is taken from WB 444, as the WB 62 tablet was broken here and only a portion of the name could be translated.
At this point, we have some historical corroboration for the fifth Sumerian king, Dumuzi. WB 444 offers no additional data on any king with this one exception, declaring Dumuzi divine and his vocation as the shepherd. As consort to the fertility goddess Inanna, Dumuzi was a legendary folk hero known also in Semitic lore as Tammuz. You can read about him in this Semitic tale of Tammuz and Ishtar. According to legend, Dumuzi disappeared and the women of the city wept and wailed to the city gate, a cult following that lasted for centuries. Perhaps the Sumerian king lists comment that Bad Tabera was smitten with weapons and the kingship transferred to the victorious city of Larak had something to do with his disappearance, who knows. A 38-line liturgical hymn to the departed Dumuzi represents the people wailing for the Lord of life, who now sleeps in the lower world. Even the prophet Ezekiel had a vision, where he was brought to the door of the gate of the Lord's house, and there sat women weeping for Tammuz, Ezekiel 8:14. So because of the cult following, biblical recognition was bestowed on the celebrated Dumuzi, the fifth pre-flood Sumerian king.
Insipsiana was the new king at Larak. The en prefix that you see quite often means lord or king in both Akkadian and Sumerian languages. So he would have been King Sipsiana. Also, you might note here that both of Adam's grandsons, Enosh and Enoch, who were sons of Seth and Cain, have the en prefix indicating that they were both kings in their respective cities. We'll talk more about that later in further episodes.
Here it becomes more relevant as the last four kings do resonate with Genesis. After Larak is smitten with weapons, kingship is transferred to Sippar, where Enmendarana, also known as Enmendaran-Ki, is crowned king. Here is Sippar on the map.
War happens again and kingship moves to Shuruppak. Here is where the pre-flood kings remain until the flood sweeps over. WB 444 ends there with the last king, Ubar-Tutu. We will include the next two kings on the composite list as their names appear on two other lists, including WB 62, and we do know a little about their relationship.
Here is Shuruppak on the map, today known as Farah. Sukerlam is also known as Shuruppak, the same name as the city. Sukerlam translated means man from Shuruppak, so it is the same man. From a book that was translated in 1974, The Instructions of Shuruppak, we also know that a father-son relationship exists between him and the next king, Ziusudra, since the instructions are to Ziusudra, his son.
Also, in that book and in the legend of Gilgamesh, Ziusudra is referred to as the son or descendant of Ubar-Tutu. As all three are located in the same city, we can infer a father-son relationship with all three. Ubar-Tutu is the father of Shuruppak or Sukerlam, and he is the father of Ziusudra.